Hi, I'm Bryce Ominski. This is the Chief Architect Forum, and today my two guests are Dan Swanson, the series editor from CRC for the cybersecurity series, and Patrick Hayes, who recently published Integrated Assurance, Unified Risk Strategy. And we're going to be talking about a whole bunch of contemporary topics. Gentlemen, what I wanted to start with was talking about your book adventure, and maybe Dan, I can get you to talk a little bit to the series of books that CRC is publishing and get more people interested. What's actually happening with the books these days? Where's the interest?
Well, thanks, Bryce. I've been doing this about 10 years now. Started as a hobby. The series is focused on security, audit, and leadership, with risk and privacy being sort of the five legs. And I think resiliency is kind of the overall theme that we're currently looking at. We published about 100 books over the course of time, and it's really picking up in the last couple of years. There's just so much challenge out there on the architecture side, on the system side, on integration side, assurance, and Patrick's done one, and he's working on another one already.
That's awesome, Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to another author just last week, and they said, you got the itch, right? So when you start developing content, the content doesn't stop flowing.
Yeah. Cool.
Excellent. And Patrick, you've done Integrated Assurance. Tell us a little bit about your journey in the book. And one of the things that really struck me when I was reading that, and with my own book, Digital Momentum, was this idea that you talked about were the 10 things that you experienced. And a lot of those things, and I'm kind of feeling this, is even before the book is published, there's a lot of benefits. So tell us about the journey.
Yeah, so first of all, I never thought I would actually write the book. I always wanted to write the book. Dan knows I always wanted to write the book. But, actually getting, setting aside the time and focusing on the book brought a lot of clarity. Brought a lot of clarity to things that I've been doing for the last 15 or 20 years. And what was interesting is as I was going through the process with my advisors and folks that were supporting me in my writing journey, is there started to become more questions than I'd ever imagined about the content of the book, right? And so as I started sharing components and snippets of it, I was getting challenges on certain things, like why would you choose the term assurance? And assurance seems to be so much more like an accounting term versus a cybersecurity term. And I said, well, it's a risk term, right? And so we talked a lot about risk. And so what ended up happening is I discovered that I wasn't writing a cybersecurity integration of, one ops team with another ops team to work together. I actually wrote a risk book at the end of the day, right? How to translate into business language, how to talk to executives, how to measure impact in a successful way. And so there's a lot of things I didn't expect to come from that writing journey.
I'm just to share, I'm experiencing the same thing with Digital Momentum. Is there's a lot of interest in the ideas, and I'm thinking most important, it helps me focus my thoughts, or having gone through it in detail. And one of the areas that I think we're all looking at is this resilience, right?
Yes. And
I think we're going through a change right now in the industry. I think it's pretty evident. And it was funny, before we were just talking, Patrick, about, is there a change? Are we finally getting some new technologies to deal with things, to get them to work? And there's a question whether it really ever did work properly before even, right? And I think when we look at these resilient architectures going forward, it's a huge change. Dan, what are you seeing out there right now? Like, it just seems like the amount of material coming out in this area is huge.
Yeah, it's really exploding, and it's not just the books, right? Like there's the papers and the articles and the podcasts and the webcasts, and it's all trying to bring it to the fore. What the series started as more a leadership. Program leadership, cybersecurity leadership, audit leadership, and over the last 5 years probably, we've probably published 50 cyber books across the waterfront. And in the current year and into the new year, and the books take a year and a half to get to the street. A lot of it now is on integration, and the resiliency side is working with your vendors, working with your systems, working with your suppliers, and getting that integration down from an architecture standpoint.
Yeah.
And I think we're finally catching up, and we're still in denial that way, because we're never catching up. But I really do think that the architecture teams are starting to tackle those integration challenges and supplier challenges. And on the book side, to reflect that, we're getting books like risk assurance that you did, architecture, and we've got one out in New York it's a novel about a AR startup that takes over the world and all the risk integration, and he uses a risk deficit, and so it's not technical deficit anymore, it's risk deficit, and trying to codify that, what's the level of risk, and into handshakes, and a little bit later on we talk about confidence. Right. If you don't have confidence in your vendor, you shouldn't be using them, right? So
absolutely, yeah.
That's becoming, the trust and confidence is kind of emerging as part of the solution.
Dan, I find that really interesting. When I did Digital Momentum, what really got me to look at the topic was an integration perspective. So I do a lot of work with ISA Global, looking at integration architectures, where they're going, and a few things are coming out that are really clear that we need to deal with. One of them is broader ecosystems that go outside the company.
Yeah.
I think the second thing that comes out is, if you're trying to do governance and you're trying to monitor, let's say, nefarious actors, right? Mm-hmm. If you try to do it, wait for the breach and respond, that's going to be too slow. And you talk about this a bit, Patrick, right?
Well, I do, yeah. And so as an architecture community, you mentioned this just as we were kind of warming up here, right? And you said, now we're starting to actually maybe see tools that support the journey that we've been on all along. And I said, well, I don't know if we've actually had the right tools ever. We've been just trying to make the tools we've had work, right?
Yeah.
So, think about it from this perspective. If your organization is very, very concerned with detection and response, why would you ever do that using SIM technology, like a security information event management system?
Yeah.
Because it was the tool we had at the time to bring all of the desperate security tools together, correlate the data, and deliver results that we could then action. But by the time you bring all the data together, you've through the parsing, now you're grokking, now you're bringing the correlation logic together, and the event happened 15 minutes ago, or 20 minutes ago, or an hour ago, and it really depends on the complexity of the language and the rest of it. So have we really been using the right tools all along to bring all of these different technologies together, and then have teams working from the same set of telemetry or the same set of data? And we're finally at a point in time where we have a new evolution of like XDR technology, and we have the ability with these large language models and AI to do better training of how that data is used faster, so we can be at the forefront of detection as opposed to the lagging side of detection, right? Using tools that were mostly meant for audit and reporting versus tools that were really used to bring technology together to respond faster.
And really being able to stop a breach in mid-flight. I mean, if we're waiting right now for things to happen,
yes,
we want to go look at it, see what happened, investigate it. These things are too slow right now with technology the way it's moving.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest things is people, when they use these systems, are going to be looking to us to establish trust, right?
Yes.
It's more than money, its reputation is on the line. We're going to be working in ecosystems. And so I think there's a question of what's coming forward. How do we build that trust? What are you seeing there, Dan? You've got a few projects that are coming through on that one, right?
Yeah, so I like one of the things on the resiliency side is real-time monitoring, right? So operational resiliency and to be truly resilient, you have to have real-time monitoring of what's happening. You can't be looking at it, a month later, 2 months later type of thing. So to get the systems and practices to be able to have that insight of what's happening in your organization and outside your organization, that's another whole nother world of a wave of architecture, design, technology, implementation, standing it up, et cetera. And that's just the typical life cycle. So that's where we're always trying to build the next solution.
Awesome. And Patrick, maybe I get you to elaborate that with a little bit of a governance angle. What do we need to do from a governance point of view to build that trust? So there's on the ground, I would think, you talk a lot about the ITOM stuff, maybe just touch on that. And how do we actually build trust? How do we assure people that we're safe and we're not just giving them a good,
Yeah, so the time of institutional trust is passing us by. And what I mean by institutional trust is, the average person looking at large organizations and thinking, they're doing the right things to protect my data, they're doing the right things to protect me. I think that fallacy's gone, right? Most people look at things like the large Target breach, or when Microsoft was taken down by a bad patch from CrowdStrike, or situations like that. They look at these situations and go, wow, these large companies, they really have problems, right? And they have, and they expose our data, and we can't necessarily trust that our private information is going to be safe and stable. Never mind the way that we operate and how we run our businesses, right? I mean, just the CrowdStrike Microsoft instance, that wasn't a security issue. That was a lack of coordination between suppliers. Doing an upgrade, first of all, doing a kernel upgrade was dangerous enough as it was, but doing an upgrade without any sort of regression testing, and an entire market that relied on a single vendor for supplying certain services with no fallback, right? So, at that time, we also lost trust in, large suppliers. We realized that we need to have alternate solutions as a point of recovery and backup so that we could continue to conduct business. And then on top of it, our teams need to be coordinated and work together. So I was working with a large organization at the time that experienced that outage in a significant way, because we needed to bring every single one of those systems back online physically. You couldn't do it remotely. You had to apply the patch physically. So IT teams and security teams needed to work closely together on that responsiveness. And it gave us an excellent opportunity for lessons learned on how do we actually re-architect the way that we do this? What are the processes? What's the governance that drives it? And how do we be responsive to the business? Because this had a significant financial impact. And that's typically what's missing when we talk about the outcomes of these things is, what is the actual impact, and how does that impact translate into actual business value or business outcomes?
Two questions I want to put up and either of you to answer. And when I think of what you're saying, there's two things that come to mind. One is the increasing use of digital twins and the ability to monitor what's happening in your organization in real time using a digital twin and leveraging that with AI. What are you seeing in the field in that? And what I'm seeing is things are moving quicker. And so one of the things I'd like to maybe consider in the question is when something happens, we're getting in, especially with AI, we're going to get into situations that maybe we couldn't have thought about all up front. And, I'm almost thinking when they introduced, say, RFID devices, right? Nobody thought there'd ever be any implications as long as they stayed in the back warehouse. But then as soon as they came forward, you opened up a whole, can of worms with privacy.
Yeah.
And now we're moving into that on steroids. What are your thoughts, guys?
Well, I think this goes almost to the next one on the list here, architecture of trust. Some of these changes, you can't just try it out. Like, you can pilot it for sure, but you can't just throw it into the production and let's see what happens. It's got to be thoughtful. It's got to be on a roadmap. It's got to be designed. It's got to be tested. I think the assurance side is really interesting, because I think the whole audit world is upended, because auditing 3 months after the fact it's not going to add value. So your assurance, your real-time monitoring of your major system changes going to become quite critical. I think as well the solution. There's no one solution, right? That's part of the challenge, and why the book series is so interesting, because we're getting risk guys writing, security guys writing, architects, auditors, and they all had their own view of what's the solution, and I think it's a blending of all these practices that are really, that's the next 10 years. One of the authors is talking about risk deficit. So don't talk about technical deficit anymore, talk about the risk deficit. So all the decisions you made for the last 10 years we'll just put it in and we'll fix it later. And so that risk deficit is building, and no one's quantifying how bad the situation is. So I do like the control to confidence label, because I think governance of, we'll talk operations at the big level, is business operations. If they go down, we're talking real dollars. So it's business resiliency that's kind of the crown jewel.
Yeah, I completely agree. We really aren't talking about crown jewels in the fact of which applications, what have you. We're talking about things like, how much is each row of data worth in your customer management system versus, how much is my customer management system worth? Because now we're talking about things like encryption, but at the row level. Because a lot of organizations, and a good friend of mine said this when we were talking last week. He said most folks think that they're doing encryption, but they're actually doing it at the volume level. Well, that's not really encryption, right? Because if you're talking about rows of customer data, you need to do it at the row level, right? Because each one of those rows is exposed if they can get into the volume, right? So, but back to your point, and one of the things that came out of that writing journey to tie the very first question together is, the one thing I never expected was to create a maturity model at the end of my writing journey, right? And that's exactly what I did within integrated assurance, was the integrated assurance maturity model, and that is, how do you take frameworks like ITIL or COBIT and ISO and NIST and marry those to regulatory standards? How do you marry that to things like Sherwood Applied Business Security Architecture or TOGAF? And then how do you use that to bring the teams together around a maturity model that says, we're going to adopt AI. And rather than marketing just using it and connecting it to their mail systems and putting all of our corporate IP into these open AI platforms, we're going to actually provide some guidelines. We're going to actually measure now to make sure that we're living within the guidelines, and we're actually going to test the models to make sure that the models are not hallucinating, that nobody has injected any kind of poisoning in there that will change the outcome of the models. Like, this is a space I don't think we've even really thought through as businesses. Is AI is great, the adoption of it, it's more terrifying than flattening your OT/IT systems, right? It's quite honestly introducing an entirely new attack plane, and people are wildly adopting it because it comes with great performance outcomes. It comes with fast responsiveness. But it also comes with horrendous risk that is largely ungoverned. And to Dan's point, I was talking with that author just recently that he was mentioning, and we're in a land of AI technical debt that is going to surpass any technical debt that we've seen in the past, because we've adopted it so haphazardly in many organizations without any kind of architecture guidance, without any kind of governance that has set the structure and allowed us to do things like backward testing, yes, or in-flight testing. And forget about secure software development. Nobody wants to do that. Now secure AI deployment. That slows it down even more. Yeah, they're still defining it.
One of the things, and you brought this out, is one of the things I talk about, and I love that you raised it, is the idea that technical debt, regardless of the source, there's this accumulated debt that we got, there's debt that we got from doing recent integrations and just getting things to talk, but we didn't get them to be semantically interoperable. But the big category, and I think you nailed it, is emergent debt. It's bringing in the AI that I've used in a sandbox, and now I'm going to connect this and cut corners
Yep.
when I do this in my enterprise with legacy systems. And that's going to, I think, fundamentally change the way we view things. How do you think the role of the CISO is going to change with all this?
That's a trick question.
It is.
This is a trick question.
It is.
Like recently, Microsoft announced that their CISO, global CISO,
Yep.
is going to have 19 deputy CISOs, and so they've reorganized their security shop.
Okay.
And those deputy CISOs are focused on business areas, and so I mean that's other organizations have that, but this is on steroids, where each CISO is dedicated to that business line, this subject, that subject, and it's a team of 20 basically. So I think the question about the role of the CISO, I think the complexity that's happening for many organizations is you're going to move to a team model much more than rely on one person. And the technology side, AI, every business area has different priorities, whether it's a telco or a finance service or a utility, and they all have risk on the business side that the traditional infosec functions, to provide board level guidance is going to be interesting, because some of those CISOs, they come up from the IT world, and they're highly competent in that space. But on the business side, what experience do they have sometimes, right? And so the level of knowledge that's required is just growing exponentially, and I'm not really big on asking AI, what the answer is, because it's too simplistic.
And I think too, there's certainly a maturity CISO discussion. Like different levels of maturity are going to do different things. So you can't. It's not one size fits all. I do like the idea you called out, the connection to the board. How do you deal with them with all this? And I see an increasing role for digital twins, to be able to capture what's happening and explain it. But I also see that there's going to be a change from what you're saying, Dan, where I may, as a board, get more interested in defining policy and guardrails than actual behaviors, because the actual behaviors are emergent and I might not be able to follow that.
Yeah. That like the whole board oversight that's been a 40-year challenge, right? Like back in 97, 98 with the Y2K and all that, what should the board oversight be on that? And they, it depends on the company, of course, but they don't want to be involved with the detail. That's management and operations. So that's a CISO or a CEO's problem, right? Not the board problem. 20 years later, 25 years later, same questions being asked with AI and all the investment in that and changing the business models. And so what's the board's role in technology investment? Because that is the business for many organizations. And so they're still debating that on what the role is. And for security, that's just a slice of the IT investment. It's an important slice for sure, but what's the business strategy and the IT strategy, and that's what the board should be worried about, among everything else. And so NACD has done some really good research and papers and guidance on board oversight. Now they're stressing on the security side, security metrics, and good to discuss, but metrics is not security, so there is challenges ahead.
Patrick, your thoughts?
Wow. So
there's a lot there.
Yeah. So first of all, having been a CISO myself, the answer varies, because the definition of what is a chief security officer in a small company is very, very different than what is a chief security officer in a large enterprise or a multinational corporation, right?
Yes.
So typically small companies, your chief security, dishwasher, and picker-upper of all things that are bad, right? In a large organization, you're the coordination of typically the coordination of technical risk, right? They don't. It should be beyond that: governance, risk, compliance, technical execution of it. The reality is, it's a big role, especially dependent on the size of the team that you have and the type of company you're in, right? Do you develop software? Do you have integration teams? Do you actually how
big your team as well?
And how big? Yeah. And so the role is definitely going to evolve. I think though, and I'm just going to bring a moment of clarity here. If we think that we're going to need more time in front of the board than we've ever had before, that's going to continue to be the challenge, right? So as a CISO and as currently as a field CISO with multiple customers of mine, getting that airtime to convey risk to the board and ask for investment in the challenges, right? Because we've changed the conversation now to risk and investment, which is a great step in progress. But your 5 minutes of content, if you get to deliver it, which we usually don't, turns into 3 bullet points that somebody else delivers, and they may get through one that gets heard. And so the challenge is still penetrating the board. It's still getting your priorities or the company's priorities to the board. And what's odd is, as a CISO, your priorities are the business's priorities, right? And so it shouldn't be viewed as as my agenda in that role. It's the organization's agenda, because I'm really the trustee, the custodian of what we need to accomplish, and how do I align with that business strategy, and how do I help the company address risks so that they can grow, so that they can execute, so that they don't have downtime, so that they are effective in business operations. And we've taken sort of an advisory type role, but we're still truly yet to show up at the board level with any level of influence
or
comprehensiveness. And I think that's going to continue to be the challenge, right? And that's why you're seeing rapid adoption of AI, but this kind of Wild West approach to how we govern it, right? It's like, let's do it, and let's do it fast, and let's take advantage of all the cost savings and all the other aspects of it. But let's, we have some guardrails and they're kind of light, but where's the real governance around this? And I think we're going to experience a fairly magnificent security incident related to AI that may or may not change our thinking.
Just a matter of time. Right?
We're on the cusp, right? It's going to happen sooner or later, and I'm thinking sooner. And because, like I said, we've created this entire new attack plane that organizations are just not prepared for. We have attackers now, like agentic AI, that can operate at a speed that a normal attacker just can't operate anymore. Agentic AI doesn't need to pause and think and reconstruct and regather resources and what have you. It can just keep moving. The big challenge, or I guess the saving grace, and probably not the challenge, is there's no motivation, right? So when it comes down to things like exfiltration, what would be motivating AI to exfiltrate data? There's no compelling motivation. That's a human motivation, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we're on the verge of a changing landscape, and any CISO that's growing in a large organization needs to comprehend the fact that we're not dealing with human attackers anymore. We're not dealing with purely the same type of the same type of risk anymore. It's moving faster.
I like the way you characterize that it's moving faster, and it brings two things to mind. One is, how do you two important things, I think. One is for the person that sees the company from the outside, is how do I convey confidence that I'm addressing their issues in an AI world, right? And the second point is, I mean, AI is here now, but we're going to see other systems come forward pretty soon. For instance, quantum and all that means, opening up the networks potentially to, quantum, I don't know what the word, anti-encryption, and be able to see things, right? How do we convince, and I mean, you raise this in your book a little bit too, Patrick, It's, and I'm going to put this out if this is where you're going or not, but looking at the perimeter and saying we don't have any breaches doesn't seem to be a strategy that works anymore. Did I get that right?
You absolutely did, right? I think when anybody ever says the term attack surface, and I've been working in this space a really long time,
Yep.
they always mean outside in, right? Your attack surface is the moat around your castle, the fence around your yard, the doors on your house. What happens when you get past the door, right? If typically most organizations are like they're like a donut, hard on the outside, soft and gooey on the inside. Once you get in, right, how hard is it for you to find your way to lateral movement? I mean, it's been proven time and time again. If you get in through, a VPN connection with user credentials that you've either socially engineered or you've found your way in, your ability to laterally move within an organization becomes easier and easier. There's that internal attack surface is a moving target on any given day. So you're absolutely right. That's the direction I'm heading, because think about this, right? Cybersecurity teams talk vulnerabilities all the time. Hey, we scanned, we found these vulnerabilities. You guys need to, you folks over in IT ops need to deal with this. You need to address this. The challenge is that vulnerabilities are not the only things that can be exploited, right? How much end-of-life software is out there? How many end-of-life servers are out there? How many system configurations are misconfigured? How many cloud environments exist in your shadow IT environment? How, just what's the health of your overall IT infrastructure? I mean, as a community, security wouldn't even exist if we did processes right, if we did IT right, if we followed all our processes, if we patched systems and we had support, for end-of-life services or end-of-life systems, we wouldn't even really exist as a community. And yet you have cybersecurity people tapping on the heads of IT people going, you have vulnerabilities, it's critical, you need to patch it. And it's like, well, how soon will that vulnerability be exploited? Well, I don't know. That's the key. What's the exploitability of your internal environment? What's the exploitability of what happens when somebody gains access to your environment? That's actually the key metric. How exploitable is it, and how quickly will it be exploited? And what damage could it cause when they do exploit it? And I don't know if we're really measuring that right now in any effective manner, right? And that's when these teams need to come together, right? IT and security, they need to talk about that, because not every critical vulnerability is really a critical vulnerability. If it can be exploited in 8 minutes or less because it's in the wild, it now becomes something that's priority to the business to fix, because your unpatched Apache servers could create unending challenges for you as a business. I won't name the company, but we all know who it is when I say that,
Yep,
right?
yep.
And the reality is, had those teams been coordinating together, maybe we wouldn't have seen that breach as a result of those unpatched servers, right? Maybe we would have much more control in our OT environments when we're talking about what that kind of internal access and internal systems look like, right? And I think that's exactly where I'm heading, is the integration, the communication level between these between these groups.
Yes.
It just needs to improve, because we're all trying to solve maybe the same problem a different way, but I almost say we're incented to solve different problems in parallel with each other.
Yes.
That never seem to really come together. They seem like they do, but do they? Right? I mean, do they really?
That's a great point. And there's so many times I've seen people working in silos, trying to solve a problem, thinking they're doing the right thing, but they're working at odds with each other in some small way. And the final thought I want to leave us with today is around culture.
Yeah.
And you're really pointing to the need to have a learning culture, a culture that can deal with this change, and a culture that goes beyond, oh, we've got a breach, that's bad, to like, oh yeah, we've got a breach and we've dealt with it and we can deal with them quickly. So Dan, how does a professional keep up with all this stuff? Is it possible?
Well, that's where, there's always something to learn, right? And I think a learning environment is huge. It's just going to get worse as well, right? So it's good news, bad news. There's retirements coming. there's a lot of old experienced professionals that are in all these different functions, and some of them are going to decide to quit and retire and have a good time. So there's the whole next wave of growth going to come up at the next tier level.
So Dan, when you say they're going to leave, is that a bad thing or a good thing, or is it just what it is? Opportunity.
It's an opportunity. Okay. For the next leadership crowd.
Okay.
So part of on the series side, we have the security audit and leadership, and the leadership is that continuity of practice,
Yep.
Continuity of the challenges and addressing them, and getting the next challenge. And so we talk about AI, and that's the next wave for sure. But there's the next wave of solution side as well, and I think that real-time operational monitoring on the resiliency side, addressing technical debt and risk debt, working through architecture on a more agile basis.
Yes.
Agile being more real-time.
Yes.
And smaller versus longer. I like some of the organizations, it's all context too, right? Like if you're in 70 countries or 100 countries, that's a totally different operation than if you're operating in one city. So I think even at the national level, there's enough challenges. But once you get beyond national and into international, the complexity goes right off the scale. And so on the book side, we're trying to get thought leaders to talk about, what are some of the solutions and practices to consider.
Yes.
And you still have to adopt it to your environment, but, write it once and use it many times. It's kind of our approach.
Awesome. Patrick.
So that very topic is what compelled me for book 2, right?
Okay.
So integrated assurance, the first book was really foundational, right? First recognizing that we're working in these silos, what these silos really represent within our organizations,
Yes.
and then how to start bringing these silos together, right? What are some really practical ways that we can bring our teams together around shared frameworks and shared outcomes and different language and culture. Culture's big. Book 2 is I won't say it's entirely about culture, but the complete underpinnings is culturally, how do you practically implement this? So it's one thing to read about the foundations, it's one thing to understand that you have this problem, right? So that's the first step.
Yes.
The second is, how do you actually start tackling this? How do you change the behavior of folks that don't typically work together to start working together, to start collaborating with each other? We've tried to take this course of security awareness training, and I was presenting to a number of students yesterday, and one of the questions that came up they said, well, do you believe in security awareness training? And I said, I sure do. I fundamentally do. I think we should all have a foundation of security awareness training. However, liken it to when you're preparing for a test in your class. If you cram the night before, how are you going to do on your test? Well, probably adequate, right? How much of that are you going to retain?
Yeah.
If you plan throughout the semester for this test and you commit a lot of this information to long-term memory, you're going to do better on the test. Absolutely, right? So, we've shifted the commitment to long-term security awareness training. However, we're still humans. So what if you show up for your test after you left your apartment, went down to your car, found a flat tire, had to change your tire, then you tried to start your car, you had a dead battery, you had to jumpstart your car to get to school, you showed up for your test late, and you sat down and you're ready to take your test, and you've had all this time for studying and whatever. How are you going to do on your test? Is it going to are you frazzled? Are you going to be focused on your test, or are you going to have to, would you have just come out of a situation that would have created a lot of anxiety? Well, guess what? Attackers love that human aspect of us. That's how they socially engineer passwords from us and get us to click on things, and we can't train the human out of being human. We're always going to be human. Yes. So culturally, we just need to be aware that we need to build processes and systems to adapt for the fact that we're going to be human, right?
Yes.
We're still going to do things, whether we've been security awareness trained to death or not, whether I've read 50 books on the subject, I'm still going to be a human, and life is going to come at me quick, right?
Yes.
And I think if we can culturally build that DNA, right, that reactiveness within our organizations, that as a developer, I see a problem in our platform that says, wow, we're exposing credentials. I need to surface this. What developer would think about that right now? It has to be part of the way that they behave, because it's a part of the company, the organization. We have no tolerance for any type of risk. And so, that the recognition of bringing that forward, and not even feeling apprehensive to bring that kind of stuff forward. So again, we're humans at the end of the day. The culture needs to shift to accommodate for the fact that we're humans.
Yes.
Working in a very technologically advanced environment that really lacks governance and process enforcement. I won't say that lacks governance and process. It really lacks enforcement. It lacks and I don't mean in the policing kind of way.
Yep.
I mean in the reinforcement way, the positive reinforcement way, hey, this was a great outcome because we followed process or because we had a process. I'll end it by saying, I went through an incident response with an organization, and that it was great. We had the incident response plan. It was fantastic. None of the names on there worked for the company anymore. So we might as well have not had an incident response plan anymore. You have to refresh. You also have to refresh this stuff pretty constantly, right?
Yes.
So, I often say to organizations, once you've done an assessment, this is great, but it's already expired. Things can change, right?
Yes.
What was risk-free, or what had the semblance of being risk-free, it could change with a technology change that happened that you're unaware of. And now it's exposed you to a new risk that wasn't captured in the last assessment or audit that had just happened. So how are you doing this, right? Real-time monitoring. You have to actually shift to a focus on how these teams work together. And how do we culturally just make this part of how we operate as companies? Security it's not a technology issue. It's always been a risk issue. It's always been a business issue. And, when I was talking to the students yesterday,
Yep.
I said, cybersecurity, next to finance, is the closest thing to business strategy you're going to find in an organization. And you can challenge me on that, but I'm telling you, if you can provide the business the level of trust and assurance that they can operate risk-free, or at least with the ability to respond to risk, that's pretty strategic. That allows you to take on business risk that you may not have with that level, without that level of confidence.
I think what you both talked to, and I think this is important, is that cultures themselves can sort of get something very much like technical debt. They can get stuck. Mm-hmm. And in order to go forward, we need to do things a little bit differently. And we're calling that out. And I think we're going to be talking a lot more about it. I really enjoyed our discussion today. There'll be a follow-up in the series. Patrick, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks very much. Glad I could make it.
Awesome,
Yeah,
Dan.
yeah.
And
Thanks for organizing.
thank you. And I just want to say this is really cool. This is live from Winnipeg. And so it just happened. We were all in Winnipeg today. And how often does that happen with people that are globally everywhere? So again, thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I'm done, man. That's it.
Yeah.
I need
That's
some
good.
fish
We
and
went
chips.
to